Scott Murray, Deputy Public Defender of Sonoma County's Public Defense Office, or Public Defender's Office, I think.
Public Defender's Office.
You're now at the Juvenile Division, but you've been downtown for years prior to that.
Yes.
What a very strange and interesting and fascinating and rewarding, I hope, career you've had.
A long, strange trip, you might say.
Yeah. How did you find yourself in this particular iteration of your professional life, having started, I believe, as a DJ?
That would be correct. When I first moved to the county, the first thing I really got into was radio.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I can hear it, I can see it, frankly.
Yeah.
In some ways, right?
Yeah. Well, that was my passion growing up was music, and so that was a dream career for me, not particularly financially, but spiritually and artistically, and it was wonderful. Yeah.
When I say see it, by the way, I mean hair, not face.
Oh, the face for radio.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, how did you just walk into a station and you have these big pipes, or I mean?
No, I wouldn't say that at all. When I moved up here after college, I just kind of floated around, had odd jobs, and.
Well, what did you study? What was your
history? American history.
Near UCSB.
At UCSB. That's right. Yeah. So when I came up here in '79, I just kind of floated around, didn't really have too much of an idea of what I wanted to do. But in listening to the radio, I'd think, I can do that.
Right.
I can do what those guys do. And it actually, what happened was I met some folks that were at Sonoma State.
Right.
They had a little. K-Sun was the name of the radio station, and it was at that time. This would have been about 1980. They had the station was in the dorms, and it seemed to be unregulated. Like there was nobody there.
Like pirate radio style.
It seemed that way, and I walked in. I wasn't a student. Somebody invited me to come in, and I stayed for a few months and kind of figured out how to do it.
Right on.
And was lucky enough to get a job fairly quickly after that.
And you moved through the ranks rather quickly in this market. I mean, you became part of like a sort of a whole gang of people who were, associated with like the movers and shakers of radio. KVRE, I believe, is where
that was the station. And at the time, I mean, there were fewer stations back then, and we were the only rock and roll station around at the time. Although, it was very, very eclectic. It was very free form, as they used to call it. I don't know about movers and shakers, but we
had, man.
Well, but you know what? The way I think KVRE worked the best was in conjunction with other parts of the community. We had record stores that played or that sold unique and eclectic types of music.
Right.
That's what we played on the air. So we had record stores like Last Record Store, Backdoor Records, the Music Coop, all these kind of.
Indie
vestiges of the counterculture kind of thing at that time, and then there were a couple of clubs that were also bringing in the bands that we were playing and that the stores were selling, and so this symbiotic thing happened so that everybody seemed to contribute to the other,
right?
And so the whole thing, it kind of brought the whole town up, I think, in a lot of ways. It was a good deal.
And at some point, you made a decision, like a pivot occurred, and you go from this free form, sort of like almost anarchic, fun, rock and roll lifestyle to becoming a public defender, but preceded by years of law school, I would imagine.
A few years, yeah. Well, the radio career took a few paths after KVRE got sold, and
you were a station manager for KCRB or
KRCB. After KVRE. Bounced around to a couple of stations, one in San Rafael, a little bit in the city, and then came back up, and the fellow that was starting the Crush called me up and said, I want to do this radio station, and I want you to be the program director and help put it together. And so that was great. It was nice to be able to do that and get that started, but it just wasn't really working out for me personally. I had kids coming along the way at that point, and so I moved away from that, and then KRCB called and said, hey, we're trying to put together a public radio station to go with Channel 22.
And that's where you got the public in your career going.
That's where the public thing started. That's right. And so I had done a lot of their pledge drives on TV to help out when I was working at KVRE.
As a local personality.
The local thing, personality, I don't know. But And that was intriguing to me because it was, again, starting up another radio station, which I really like doing, but it was the public aspect of it rather than commercial radio was very intriguing. And they hired me as the station manager to help get it going. There were already a lot of moving pieces going on, folks that had been working on getting it together.
Well, what was it about the public angle that really appealed to you? I mean,
I don't want to just say that commercial radio or commercial media is, by and large, just
you can slam them. They're not listening.
What's the word I'm looking for? They're not. It's not completely just bought and sold.
Right.
But there are pressures and there are reasons to restrict the flow of information.
Got it.
In the regular media, and so not having that, and having the idea being having the ability to broaden out, make sure you touch pieces of the community that are not getting heard from, make sure that you're airing things that aren't going to be part of the regular scheme of commercial radio or TV.
Right.
That was very intriguing to me.
And I can see the seeds of what became your calling kind of obviously developing there, opening up and making sure that people are represented and speech is protected and all that. It's a really, at that point, it sounds like you had like your personal economic pressures, you're thinking about your future and your family and supporting that. You've developed this interest in the sort of philosophically speaking. When did the break happen? When did the switch?
Well, I really was not interested in, the only thing that kept me in regular radio, in commercial radio, was the freedom to play eclectic music and do further my vision, I guess.
Yeah, and you're a Dead fan, right? I mean,
there's no doubt about that, but I like eclectic.
Yeah.
I like eclectic in all ways. And to me, to narrow it down is to minimize the power of the media.
Yeah.
And so KVRE was perfect
Yeah.
for such a long time. We certainly had boundaries, but within those boundaries, we were able to express ourselves. As that type of media got more computerized, less free form, less input from the person who was actually sitting there working the board and putting music on.
We're entering like the Clear Channel era at this point.
Correct. That's right. And that's when I sort of, it wasn't worth it to me anymore. And that's where the public radio aspect came up, and I thought, well, that's a good thing to do. Although I was trying to get out of radio.
Right.
It felt a little bit like with Godfather 3 when Michael Corleone says, I tried to get legitimate and they pulled me back.
They kept pulling me back.
But this was a good reason for it. And I loved KRCB. And it was a great thing, but I still realized that I wasn't going to be able to move on to the way that I wanted to. So enter the fact that there's a law school in town.
Let's come back to that in a second. We're with Scott Murray, Deputy Public Defender here in Sonoma County. We'll be right back.
Welcome to Understood.org, a free online resource for parents of kids with learning and attention issues, with personalized recommendations, tools, and daily access to experts to help your child thrive. Understood.org, because understanding is everything.
Hey, look at Mommy.
Maybe the light hurts his eyes.
Maybe she's just not hungry. Look. Maybe it's a phase.
Avoiding eye contact is one early sign of autism. Learn the others today.
We're with Scott Murray, Deputy Public Defender from Sonoma County's Public Defender's Office. Currently in the Juvenile Division. He's been everywhere else, including on air as a radio personality locally, and we're having a great chat about the transition you made professionally from being, at this point, we left off at public radio and becoming a public defender. And some of the things we touched on were giving people a voice and not being encumbered by special interests, commercial interests, and how in some ways that was sort of something that was already in your consciousness was becoming like more important to you or helping direct your career.
Sure. Was
there a moment? Were you in? Did you go to court? Was it Perry Mason? Well, what did you see? What?
Well, I hadn't. When I decided I wanted to get out of radio, I really didn't know what direction what I was gonna do. But fortuitously, I suppose, I got a summons from the courts to come in and be a juror.
That's great.
And I came, and that was, that was probably 94, 95, somewhere around there. And it was fascinating. I grew up in Philadelphia, and all of our field trips when you're a kid in Philadelphia, you go to Independence Hall and you see the Constitution's in Washington, but you see the buildings, and it's all colonial and early American ideals.
Right.
And I loved history, and I was fascinated with the idea of being a juror. Got picked, was in the courtroom. The case ended up settling in between before we were actually trying to decide it. But I loved the process, and it stuck in the back of my mind. And someone mentioned to me shortly after that, there's a law school nearby, and it wasn't even in the context of me doing something like that, but it planted a little seed in my head that, hey, that might be a possibility. Frankly, I would never have been able to go to law school if there wasn't Empire Law School right here in town, because it's at night. I could still work in the day.
I was going to say,
I had a family, and
in
it
your
was
early 30s, maybe at the late 20s.
I went to law school when I was 40.
Really?
I started law school when I was 39.
I mean, that's a big change.
It was, but it was. It felt very natural, and it enabled me to kind of start, first of all, stimulating. A lot of people think that they're kind of done. You're not going to think big thoughts anymore after you've been through a lot of your adult years. But I found too that having been just in radio for 15 or so years, that my mind had sort of gotten focused on just certain things to get through the day. And I think we all do that sometimes. And I needed to open it up again. I felt like my head needed to open up one more time. And going to law school did that. Being able to do it at night, working during the day and then going to the night classes was the only way.
This was like an addendum to your whole life
It
already.
was. It was.
On top of it,
And it was a terrific experience. I met some great people. I finished it in 3 years. I think it was supposed to be a 4-year program, but I was motivated to do it quickly because I had one daughter, and there was another one coming on the way. So and she was born during law school, so I needed to get that all done.
And did you think you were going to go into criminal law or?
Well, I had absolutely no aspirations for that at all. But during my time in law school, I was offered a job to be a law clerk at the public defender's office, and as it turned out, there were half a dozen people at the public defender's office that were big KVRE fans earlier, and so
then you were a known quantity to some degree.
I guess known for good or ill, and it was a great, very family-like environment there. Public defenders, I think, are unlike any other type of lawyer. It's like being in the trenches. You always get you're not going to see the newspaper or people out in public generally saying, "Boy, I love public defenders." But I think we do important work, and that's what flipped me. I ended up, after doing some work as a law clerk, I realized this is great work. This is important. This is fulfilling, and the fact that it's for people that can't afford lawyers made it all the more up my alley.
It seems like a total synthesis of a concept that had been growing with you for quite some time.
I never thought about it that way, but I suppose it appealed to the same kind of instincts, I guess, as freeform radio and public radio, and there was that. Now that you bring it, I guess that's true. I guess that's true.
When you're in the trenches, when you're as a public defender, and sort of recognizing that practicing that kind of law is really a calling, it sounds like ultimately it attracts those who are drawn to trying to achieve a very specific thing. What kind of cases do you get? I mean, what are we seeing here?
All of them. Well, if we're talking about downtown with the adults, it's everything from small-time drug offenses or DUIs to rapes, murders, assaults, everything. I've had a little bit of everything all along the way.
And when I get a public defender when I cannot afford my own attorney. That's step one. That's correct. It's
public defenders aren't available to people that if you own a house.
You can't elect to get a public defender.
Correct. You have to qualify, and frankly, probably 80 to 85% of the cases in the county are public defender cases because not that many people can afford a private attorney.
It's interesting. And okay, so when you get a case, like, do you ask yourself, is this person guilty? Or do you have a sort of, as a essentially, you know, like, as a Sonoma County employee, ostensibly, right? There's a sort of like what could be perceived as an inherent conflict, right?
Sure.
Right.
Well, I'm sure that's certainly something that that gets brought up from time to time.
Yeah.
But really, where it comes down to is, first of all, when you get sworn in as an attorney, you're upholding the Constitution.
Right.
And there are canons of rules, regulations, moral restrictions, and things like that I think that most people that actually get into it do it for the right reasons. You know, the reasons of, well, for me, the thing about public defender work is what we do is we protect the Constitution. And that Constitution is a living document that actually has to be enforced.
Right.
And so the question...
That's not the answer I expected, you know, that it's the Constitution and what that represents and how that reflects upon your client, ultimately.
That's right. That's right. I mean, those 10 amendments in the Bill of Rights and the Constitution itself are there for a reason. And they were put into those documents 200 some odd years ago because of abuses that had happened originally in England, and that they didn't want to happen here.
Let's come back to this thought in the next segment. We're with Deputy Public Defender Scott Murray from the Sonoma County Public Defender's Office. We'll be right back.
Welcome to Understood.org, a free online resource for parents of kids with learning and attention issues, with personalized recommendations, tools, and daily access to experts to help your child thrive. Understood.org, because understanding is everything.
Hey, look at Mommy.
Maybe the light hurts his eyes.
Maybe she's just not hungry. Look. Maybe it's a phase.
Avoiding eye contact is one early sign of autism. Learn the others today.
We're with Deputy Public Defender Scott Murray from the Sonoma County Public Defender's Office, having just a really interesting conversation about the nature of his work as a public defender. And having worked with adults, in our last segment we talked about how in many ways you defend the Constitution via your client and what they've done. And I'm very grateful because in our break you encouraged me to just ask the question.
Ask the question.
And the question I've been skirting is, how do you defend people that have done terrible things?
The way that question usually gets put to me is, how can you defend those people?
Fair enough.
And I'm proud to do it. Let me just make sure that it's clear that we as public defenders and any attorney, we actually defend our client. And so
yes,
when I said defending the Constitution, that's how it's done.
Right.
And those are rights that are ironclad and have to be enforced. So
I'm not trying to suggest you're abdicating your responsibility for the client, but
Of course, but everybody gets a lawyer if they're charged with a crime, because for many, many years, folks that couldn't afford lawyers would get railroaded.
Right.
And they don't know what their rights are, they don't know how to go about it, and it wasn't until the early 60s, a case called from a guy that was in prison named Gideon, and he wrote to the Supreme Court himself and said, how can I be convicted? I didn't have a lawyer. At any rate, that started the whole process of public defender work nationwide, so that people that can't afford it will get representation. So when a lot of these cases come in, what we have to do is sit down. I mean, probably the first job is to sit down and listen. I mean, a lot of the folks that we end up representing have been having troubles in other parts of their life anyway. And so when they sit down, nobody's wanted to listen to them. They get arrested, they get brought into jail. The police officer isn't really interested that much once they're being taken in and hearing what they have to say. They don't think the judge is going to give them a fair shot. Nobody in the jail really cares about what their story is. And sometimes the first person that's actually going to listen to them is somebody from our office, where we would sit down and say, okay, tell me about it. Tell me what's going on. Tell me how this happened. Through the course of actually getting to know that person and getting some trust from that person, which sometimes takes a while, that's where we get to learn who they are, why they did it, or if they did it, and then looking through the reports, the police reports, trying to figure out whether the job was done properly. Maybe the first thing to look at is to see whether the police did their job properly. Did they respect Fifth Amendment rights, Fourth Amendment rights, all the things that have to do with criminal defendants start at the very beginning when they first get in contact with the police, and then it goes through the procedures in court. Are they going to be protected? Is the right kind of evidence going to come in? Who's going to be a witness and who shouldn't be a witness?
But do you use that framework to distance yourself?
Well, I'd have to say that it's ideally maybe distancing yourself emotionally would be helpful. I mean, I'm not really able to do that.
Yeah, I was going to say,
to be honest,
there is an empathy, but also there might be an anger, or you may despise this client.
I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I loved every client.
Right, of course.
But at the same time, even the most difficult of folks that I might have represented had something. They had a kernel of something to say, and many times my job is just to try and minimize the damage, or to listen to their story. And let's assume it's one of those cases where there is no defense. Right. We're always looking for a defense, and there are many legal defenses on things. But if there isn't one that applies to this particular client, we got to make sure that all the other circumstances that led to their arrest get addressed as well. And so maybe there's a drug problem that caused it. And certainly drugs are involved in an awful lot of cases. Sure, yeah. If not the reason for the case, it's the background that led to whatever the offense is. And so maybe the best thing I can do is to push to try and make sure that this particular person gets some drug treatment. And certainly there's been many times over the years that years later I'll be walking through the mall or be on the street and somebody say, hey, remember me? And I'll recognize the face. And they'll say, you got me a program and it helped and I'm working now. And I'm doing good. And so sometimes that's what the defense turns out to be. You're representing the human being, and you're using the Constitution to make sure that their rights are being protected.
Right.
And I have no problem with that. I don't,
And it's the rights too. That's what's germane here. You're protecting
huge.
Their rights.
It is absolutely. It is the thing that
you're not defending their crime. You're defending their rights.
You're defending the person, and you're defending the rights.
Right.
And you're doing your best to try and help that person. Sometimes you can't.
Right.
Sometimes you can. Sometimes there are things that the way it was done, either in the arrest or as it was starting to unfold in court in a trial, you find out that you get surprised. You start a trial, and things that you thought were ironclad in a police report change right away when somebody gets on the stand and says, well, I didn't really mean that I saw him. I thought I saw somebody that, and what was a surefire witness perhaps for the prosecution turns out then to be very weak when they actually have to swear to tell the truth and whatnot. So,
do you ever mix with prosecutors? I mean, are you guys colleagues?
Sure. Yeah. Oh, sure. Yeah. No, I have a lot of friends that are prosecutors.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that I give them a break when we get into the courtroom.
Right.
But
I mean, most people's perception of the law in this context is TV, basically. Right?
Well, it's adversarial, but at the same time, sometimes it's important to know that you may need the help of that prosecutor to get what you want.
Right.
And so while I don't think any of the prosecutors that I've ever encountered, well, let's say most of them, I don't think I've come across very many that would not be willing to sit down and talk about a reasonable way to help my client if it serves the greater need of a program or some other mental health work or something like that. That serves society as well. And so I don't like to cut off those relationships. I like to make sure that I have a working relationship with every prosecutor that I work with.
What if they're an A's fan? versus a Giants fan?
I don't have too much of a problem with the A's. If they,
but you're a big Giants fan, though, right?
Yeah, if they were Dodger fans, well, we might, yeah.
But it sounds like there's a lot of like sort of, you know, like, I wouldn't say wheeling and dealing, but like discussing and exploring and working.
Discussing and exploring, and remember, I have confidential relationships with my clients, and so there's only so much that I can tell them unless I have permission from the client. But that way I'm able to bring up issues and bring up solutions maybe that will help my client if it looks like we're not going to be able to win a trial.
Right.
And that alone makes it important to cultivate, if not friendships, cordial relationships with prosecutors.
Well, sir, I have to say thank you for your being candid and sharing what you have. I really appreciate it. We're with Scott Murray, Deputy Public Defender from the Sonoma County Public Defender's Office, currently with the Juvenile Division. Got to come back and talk about that too, man.
We didn't even get to Juvenile, which is a whole different story, and it's a very, very good story.
Yeah.
Juvenile is an exciting place to be.
We'll have you back if you're up for it.
I'd be happy to.
Thanks a lot, man. I really appreciate it.
You bet.